I'm Jace Tanner, reporting from Vancouver's Downtown Eastside, a neighborhood with severe issues, amongst them poverty, homelessness, and drug overdose, all of which have been intensified with the pandemic. Earlier this week, I met with 3 people who have made significant contributions to the community. Karen Ward is a resident, a drug user, and a consultant to the City of Vancouver on drug policy. Jean Swanson is a decades-long activist and presently a city councillor in Vancouver. And Libby Davies, whose activism is also decades in length. She later went on to become a city councillor and then the MP for the area. Welcome to you all.
Well, Libby, perhaps we could start with you. As we've just said, given a little bit of your background, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about how you first met Karen and Jean.
Well, I've known these 2 wonderful people for quite a while. Certainly Jean. Jean and I go way, way back. Jean, I was trying to count the years earlier. I think probably to about 1974. We were both a lot younger, and Jean and I both were organizers in the Downtown Eastside with the Downtown Eastside Residents Association at DERA that you mentioned, Jace. And we had many escapades together over the years. And even though we went in slightly different directions, we both continued activism, work, and I think both of us always maintained a very strong connection to the Downtown Eastside. I think Jean more so in later years, but honestly, Jean, she's one of my dearest friends and someone I look up to. So it's fabulous to be on a Zoom interview with you, Jean. Karen, I only met Karen, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, but it feels like forever. We've always connected well and talked and met and talked things over about what's going on, what to do, how to respond to things. And I really admire Karen's insight into what's happening in the Downtown Eastside and her connection to people right at the street level, right at the grassroots level as far as what's going on. So I think you've got kind of the old guard here who go way back. You've got, newer folks. So I'm looking forward to the discussion we're going to have about this neighborhood that we love so much, that we feel so connected to. And as usual, there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of issues and a lot of challenges and things that people are facing because of external factors. So happy to get right into it.
Before we do, maybe Jean or maybe Karen would like to say a few words about how you met each other as well, or we can just move on as you wish.
I was thinking about, I think the first time that Libby and I sat down, I remember this one, it was at the Ovaltine, and it was in 2017. And you'd been away, I think, and you asked, you came back to you were in the neighborhood and you said you were just in shock. You were shocked about what was going on. And that was in, one of the, well, I don't even know, not the beginning, but the kind of first big intense part of the overdose crisis. And I was telling you a little bit about what was happening. And
you got a good memory.
Yeah. I remember that pretty well though, because you helped me really think through my thoughts and put them into some sort of order. And I think that's that's really helpful, just helping me think things through, and because you get it, it's really helpful for me, because I remember at that time things were just so overwhelming too, and you really helped me make sense of it and find a direction to go in. That was a good Ovaltine discussion.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Jean?
Well, Libby pretty much dealt with how we met. We were like right on top of each other for 7 years, I think, at DERA every day. I can't remember where I met Karen. Maybe it was during the Downtown Eastside Local Area Plan. Anyway, I always have a lot of respect for what Karen says, especially about drug use. And whenever I meet with the mayor, I wag my finger at him and say, "Are you listening to Karen?"
Me too.
And Karen also wrote the most beautiful piece of writing I've ever read. So yeah, and I know she's like totally committed to folks in the Downtown East Side and making lives better for them.
Well, that's the perfect segue. And what I'd like to ask of you, Karen, first of all, you live in the Downtown East Side. I'd like for you to tell us what life is like down there right now. And then I'd also like to hear about your work as a consultant with the city of Vancouver.
Well, right now right now things are pretty bad, and things are pretty bad in the neighborhood right now. There's a lot of look out right now. It's like it's raining. It's going to turn to a cold tonight. There's a lot of people who are sleeping out and staying out. There's a lot of people with nowhere to go. We're having it's the emergency has become really normalized, and it's really tough. It's not living really. I mean, it's just barely scraping through, and it feels sometimes like it does feel like there's no end to it. It's exhausting and overwhelming, and there's it's hard to things are tough because there's no the people always talk about how everybody was very well connected and things like that in the neighborhood, and that's not so true right now anymore, because a lot has changed in the last 4 or 5 years. A lot has changed, and a lot of people have died, and it's really tough to those people were connections, and they're gone, and more, of course, it's more than overdose. It's also all the other ways that people meet their ends, and it's always it's all, like I was saying the other day, it's people die. So people die of poverty, and people die of injustice, and people die because no one's concerned with how life is going, and we accepted that as normal in a lot of ways, and it's something that it always is, and that poverty is inevitable, and it's really not. I mean, it's not. But we've become accustomed to emergency, I guess, and it's not great. It's a cycle, right? It's a cycle of crisis. Everybody's in it. I mean, there's stuff that is happening, in pockets that are really positive, but it's like people can't even see what's going on the next block over because you're so busy where you are,
Karen, can you tell me about some of those positive things, please?
Well, I think there's some housing that's going to start being built really soon. There's an Indigenous Healing Wellness space with some housing at the location of Pigeon Park, Columbia, and Hastings. That's great. It's going to replace the housing that was there, and there's going to be more housing. So it's a great thing. But I mean, it's like that's. Again, it's like it's been so long. It's hard to say that's a big positive, but at least it's something. We're not going to look at a bunch of empty lots. 58 is going to start being built really soon too. 58 West Hastings, and that's a really good thing too. So that's 300 units. But it's hard to say. I mean, it's hard to say this is, this just feeling like you've been so crushed for so long. It doesn't feel like you're getting anywhere. But it's so I would, I don't want to frame it too much as negative positive, because it's not like an equation. It's not like we're going to, I don't know. It feels like, I think there's a lot of things that are happening that can be seen as quite good. Like, some of the creative work that's going on and out of say the 312 or the Binners Project out of Chinatown. But it's a different kind of thing. I think that, the work that's being done through the Toro Project, the tenant organizers and the SROs, is a really important work, and it's very, very conscious of its place, where it is, and it's the meaning of home in a neighborhood. So I think that stuff like that is really, really good. I think that but it's hard. But again, it's because we're still mid-pandemic. It's like people can't actually even go inside and sit down for the most part. So things feel like they're things feel like they're floating above. They're not solid. Things don't feel entirely. Things aren't normal, and that's fine.
When you observe all these things, and in your work as a consultant with the city, and I assume that you bring these things to the attention of the city, how does the city respond?
Well, not the best. I mean, everything moves so slowly, and it's so frustrating because it's so frustrating because you're constantly trying to fight for attention on when it comes to the budget line, right? Because it's like, oh, we care about this. Well, show me, let's do it. We know what to do. Here's the proposal. Let's go do this now. And then, 6 months later, it's so frustrating because it renders you incapable of responding in an urgent way. And that's something that, and we learned this too. We learned this from the province when the province responded like it did to COVID. It didn't wait 6 months, back last year. It responded right away because that's what you do in an emergency. And that's what I've not seen. I've not seen that kind of response from the health authorities or from, and the city gets handcuffed by all these other competing priorities, primarily police. And then there's, and then there's the, it's just me fighting for all this stuff. And it gets to be a lot. And then there's, patios were more important, for restaurants than this stuff. And then it's always somebody else's business to deal with this sort of thing. And then it explodes in a it literally explodes with dysentery and like a literal shit show. It's awful that it has to come to this, and it doesn't have to, but I think part of the problem is that we've become so used to it. The emergency. Oh, well, that's just how it is down here. It doesn't have to be.
Can I shift to you now, Jean, and could you comment on how you see the city responding to the concerns that Karen is raising?
Well, I agree with her about how everything is so slow and how frustrating it is, and why can the city implement outdoor patios for restaurants when they can't open up some outdoor space in the downtown east side? And I keep using that. I'm like typing jillions of memos to everybody saying, let's pretend the downtown east side was the restaurant that needed a patio. It's so frustrating. I've gotten a real education about bureaucracy being up there, that's for sure. Yeah, and COVID has made everything way worse, or it's revealed how bad everything was, because the shelters are having to have physical distancing, so more people are out on the street. People aren't couch surfing as much, so they're on the street. So it seems like homelessness has doubled, basically. And then we've got Shigella and COVID on top of, and ODs on top of that. And yeah, I think actually it's a very morbid thought, but I think our homeless count would be way higher if there hadn't been so many deaths. And
Zero homeless count this year.
Yeah, and there's no homeless count this year, but last year. And yeah, so I do agree that we need a COVID type response to all this stuff. There have been some good things. There's a lot of people in nonprofits that are working really hard to get free food to people. And there's a lot of peers doing a lot of good work. And of course, the OPS is doing a lot of good work. But the thing that's so frustrating to me is three things. The welfare rates are so low. There's no vacancy control in the SROs yet. So that means that they're being gentrified. And whenever a building gets sold, the rents basically double or triple whenever a tenant leaves. So we lose those units, and it's kind of a pipeline to homelessness. and then there's not enough affordable housing being built. So,
Libby, would you like to weigh in on this?
Well, you know, it's to hear both Karen and Jean speak about what they're seeing and facing. Karen is a local activist and advising the city, and Jean is one member of city council who's always been incredibly vocal and strong on the Downtown East Side. I mean, it's really hard to hear what you have to say, because what you're saying just speaks volumes about the level of frustration and maybe sense of despair. And so it's a real eye-opener for me, because whenever I talk about the Downtown East Side, I always try to talk about the resilience that people incredibly have with the most daunting challenges that are thrown at them every day. But what I hear you saying is that maybe that's changed, and that people are feeling like they're drowning and they can't see the land, as you said, Karen. So that really feels very heavy, and it seems like this familiar story, right? I remember when the first health emergency was declared in the Downtown East Side, when Bud Osborne was alive and he was on the health board. That was like back in 1998, and the regional health board declared an emergency, and it was the same thing. Like not much happened. Yeah. So it really makes you think about what an emergency is and how governments respond to it, right? And even with COVID, I mean, there are criticisms about, the government of Canada, the province of BC, but the reality is things did move very quickly. And so what needs to happen in the Downtown East Side is, both immediate and emergency, but also long term. And I guess what I worry about is that we never seem to get to that longer term. Yeah. Right? It's always so immediate that we never seem to be able to get into the longer term sustainable actions that are needed to provide the economic supports. But I do think, I think Jean's hit on something pretty major, and that is, the level of poverty that is just, never ending. Like, how can anybody do anything, when they're caught in that, right? And so, I think that's really a major issue, is just the economic inequality that hits this neighborhood the hardest of probably most parts of Canada. Yeah. And people are just like, they can't get above it. They can't get above it. So that's something that really needs an emergency response as well, right? If you just don't have enough money and you run out at the 15th day of every month, or the 7th day even, after you've paid your rent.
Karen, earlier today, I listened to the town hall that CBC did maybe a year and a half ago. Oh, yeah. And one of the things that you said there was that you believed that if a safe supply were provided, that would go a long way to ending the poverty issues in the Downtown East Side. What would you say about that now?
Well, it would reduce the poverty. It wouldn't. I think that I was saying, this isn't, as far as overdoses, the poisoning crisis. It's not medical. It's not criminal. It's actually economic as well. It's an economic crisis. That's how we got into this situation, and that's why we can't get out of it, because people become actually poor every month, every week, on the same income. I think that a safe supply would go a long way to reducing poverty. It would reduce all kinds of crime, both petty crime and big crime. And if it's done, it should be done aggressively and quickly, because that's all we've got. I don't think it was anybody's first idea to address the overdose emergency, but at this point, there's nothing else. It's the well is poisoned. We have to flood the system. So it would reduce poverty, because that's what everybody's spending. If you think about the illicit drug market as a unregulated tier of healthcare, then maybe we've got a way to think about why safe
Karen, we seem to have lost your audio again.
We got too poor. That's why this all has gone dramatically wrong.
Karen, we lost you for a moment.
Oh,
Could
I'm
you
sorry.
backtrack?
I was saying that we got into this mess because of poverty. We got too poor. That's what, that's how fentanyl entered this market in the first place, because it's much more profitable than heroin. That's how we got here. That's why we're staying here. Safe supply, which wasn't the first thing that you think of to address the overdose emergency, but it's the only thing we can do now, because this has completely saturated our entire illicit economy. If you think of the illegal drug market as an unregulated tier of healthcare, then you have right there. That's your moral imperative, both for doctors and for for the medical profession and for the political will. Maybe that's there now to address it in that way. Safe supply.
Okay, thank you, Karen. I think we might have lost you again. I'm not sure, but I'm going to ask Jean, where does the city stand on providing safe supply and on the issue of decriminalization of simple possession?
Yeah, that works in tandem, right, with safe supply. They both need to happen because they both play into each other. If you're getting safe supply, then you're becoming decriminalized. You have to, decriminalization of simple possession is about, it's about the substance, but fundamentally it's about a change in society. That's what that does. And it won't be instant. It'll be slow. It'll happen over time. It's not unlike when homosexuality was decriminalized in 1969. It didn't happen. Things didn't change magically the next day. Things changed slowly over time about how people thought. And that's what that's about. And safe supply is about, being there for that, becoming a citizen and becoming human, in fact, in the eyes of society, and interacting with society in a different way. So, and safe supply is about actually everyone. It's just so frustrating right now because we're so close, and the biggest barrier is doctors. So, who for the most part are just unwilling to acknowledge that they have a role here.
Okay, thank you, Jean. Can you tell me where the city stands on these two issues and what has been the city's experience with interacting with both the province and Ottawa?
So the city is totally behind safe supply and decrim, right, left, center, and green. 100%. It's a no-brainer. I think the mayor is doing the negotiations with the province and the feds, and he's 100% behind it too. I think what Karen said is about the safe supply, that the doctors are the stumbling block. That's what I'm hearing too. In terms of the decrim, that's another, it's kind of mired in bureaucracy. I think the city is trying to, maybe Karen is involved in this, set up a Vancouver model and then send some stuff to the feds saying, defining what is a small amount for personal possession. What's the definition of that? And so it's mired in doing that kind of stuff. So I'm hoping we can speed it up. I'm going to try and push for that this week when I have a meeting with the mayor.
Yeah.
If I could jump in, Jace, I think that what we've got here is sort of an example of what often happens, and that is the first part of the battle or the struggle is getting the political will to actually move on something. In this case, we're talking about a safe supply of drugs, illicit drugs, so that people don't have to deal on a poisonous drug market and basically die, and then decriminalization under law. So, getting that to happen at a political level, Vancouver City Council has been great. I believe it was a unanimous motion back in November of 2020. And, this has actually been a good history for Vancouver. Vancouver has always led the way on drug policy reform, on harm reduction, going way back to the 1980s with needle exchanges, then with the first safe injection site called Insight that started in 2003. I mean, there were big battles and struggles to get it to happen. And, the feds and even the province had to be sort of dragged kicking and screaming into it. But eventually the political will came about. And so that part is done. But I think what's happening now is that the challenge is actually implementing the system. These are complex questions. Even the notion of safe supply, there are many different sort of models that could be used, from a highly medicalized model where you have to kind of go in, check into a clinic, get someone to sign you off, and you get your supply. And so it's highly regimented, to things that are much more accessible. And one of the interesting projects is from Dr. Mark Tyndall, who's got this policy or program called MySafe, which is basically safe supply through vending machines. I mean, wow, that's very creative. So we've got a whole spectrum here. And what I think is really important is that the federal government provide the exemption under Section 56 of the Controlled Drug and Substances Act to allow Vancouver and the various organizations that are involved in providing services with the city of Vancouver to really figure out what it is that works, what is accessible to people, what is a regime or a program that gives people respect and dignity, right? And a sense of ownership about their own lives and what they can do. So that has to happen. I think in terms of decriminalization, there are models elsewhere. One of the models that's often cited is Portugal. Their model of decriminalization is more restrictive, in terms of how they define what personal possession is. I think they say that somebody can have a 10-day supply. So, Karen and Jean are right that, Vancouver needs to be able to work that through. But I think the most important thing, just from my experience over many years, is that the bureaucrats and the policymakers, they need to actually give space. They need to give space at the city for this to happen, because we don't know all the answers, right? We don't know, what would be a disaster is if you have to basically prove that what you're doing is going to work before you've even done it. Right. And sometimes that does happen. I know for Insight and the overdose prevention sites, I mean, the number of rules that can get set up can be quite onerous. So I think the most important thing right now is give the city and the people involved space to actually figure out how to make this work at a very low threshold, grassroots, accessible level that really is meeting people where they're at. And if we could just do that, and if the doctors would sign up and forget about whatever moral judgments they have, or, stuff like that, and just think about what is going to help people right now in terms of being healthier and not being poisoned to death. That's where we have to go.
Yes.
Thank you, Libby. Karen, I recently saw on your Twitter that you had a bad experience with some drugs. Could you talk about that?
Well, there was there's benzodiazepine in basically everything. So I had some, obviously inadvertently, and they're very, very potent, and you are out for a while. So that was, it's awful, and it's happening to lots of people. So, and this is what unregulated is. And that's, it's not about this drug is bad, this drug is good. It's about knowing what it's a very basic assumption for everyone else all the time, that you don't go get something, consume it, and say, oh, I hope I don't die, or I hope this is what it says, or you don't wonder if it is what it says. Even it never occurs to you to wonder if the label matches the product, for example. You don't wonder that, because that's a social, it's a contract that we have, that we assume is, and it works, right? You don't buy things, consume them, and then find out later it's something else. So this is a very basic assumption that we have in regulated capitalism. Those rules are just gone for this because it's not legal, but it exists. So, yeah, it was. I mean, it happens. It's happened to it happens, and it's awful, but it's also, I mean, it's a reality. I mean, it's not knowing what you're doing, not being able to have that knowledge of what you're consuming is really, I mean, it's a consumer rights issue if you want to put it that way. It's also a really basic thing that we assume is true for people in society. You don't have to worry about that, which is another example of why, people who use drugs aren't full humans, because we're not given that. We don't have that. We can't make that assumption. So, I mean, and that is considered fine, apparently, by that same society. That's considered part of the punishment, I suppose.
Thank you. Jean, I'd like to ask you about the motion that Council passed not too long ago about maintaining the $300 supplement to social assistance. Where do things stand with that right now?
Well, that's another thing where the council is unanimous, left, right, and green. We've actually passed several amendments that I've made to raise welfare rates to the poverty line. So the latest wasn't actually a motion, it was an op-ed that I drafted with Christine Boyle, and we got all the councillors to sign on it. They just all signed on it saying, let's have a $300 increase as a step to getting to the poverty line for everybody. And where that stands now is the province, which is responsible for welfare, has a budget coming up in April. And they just announced that they're going to raise welfare by $175, which is actually a reduction from what people on welfare have been getting during COVID, where they got a $300 top up and then they got a $150 top up. So now they're getting $760 plus $175. So it's $935 or something. And people on disability get $1183, I think, and that'll be plus $175, but it's still not enough. It's not nearly enough when you've got, like, the average rent in Vancouver is something like $2,000 a month. So I think when COVID came and we got CERB, which was $2,000 a month, it was kind of a recognition that that's what an ordinary person needs to live on, is $2,000 a month. And I think if that holds true for people, that got CERB, it also holds true for people on welfare and people on disability. People on disability could actually make the argument they need more because their disability costs them more. So there was a demonstration a couple of days ago on Howe Street downtown in front of what purports to be a welfare office. And people are still fighting for it, but we are going to have to keep fighting, keep up the pressure.
Did you receive any kind of response to that op-ed that was in the province? Did you receive a response from the province itself?
No, but what I should say also is, I think the reason that the city, all of the people in the city council signed on is because it is so obvious that the deep poverty that everyone in the city who depends on welfare is experiencing is causing huge problems for the city that the city doesn't have the resources to deal with. And most of those problems result in people who aren't poor saying, like Karen said, she's never seen so many police in the Downtown Eastside. So most of those problems result in people who aren't poor saying, give me some police to get these poor people out of here. And it's a terrible way of dealing with poverty. And we got another motion passed, a motion of mine to have the staff report back on how to replace police safety services with community-led safety services, and to come back with a budget and a timeline for actually doing that after consulting with a bunch of groups, including groups that represent people who are policed, like Van Du and Pace and Wish and pivot, different people. So I'm hoping we can get something for the next budget, but then the city doesn't completely control the police. We only have 2 out of 7 people on the police board. So I don't know. I'm hoping we can get something happening anyway.
Libby, would you like to comment on this?
Well, the upcoming provincial budget, I think, is going to be very telling in a way, because partly because of COVID and because, I think all of the issues around budget austerity that, governments used to use to stop providing services that are cut back, have pretty well gone out the window because of COVID. So, it's quite interesting that because of COVID, Jean talked about the $2,000 a month CERB, and I think there has been a much stronger recognition across the country that, people that society considered valueless before are suddenly the most important people around us, right? The people who deliver food, the people who stock the grocery shelves, the people working in healthcare, the providers, people who work in long-term care, the people who got usually very shitty wages, right? And so I think a lot of things have been kind of turned upside down, and people are recognizing what the value is of different kinds of work. And so I guess on the one hand, I feel hopeful that maybe this provincial budget coming up will be a budget that actually does help, kind of lift the whole tide, and recognize that we do need to have basic standards for income, for health and safety. We do have those standards at BC, but they need to be improved. We need to make sure that people who work in long-term care or on the front line in the various housing programs, that they're safe, because they're facing challenges too. So there is an opportunity there. So I feel partly hopeful, because I think there has been a lot of pressure that's been building up, and as part of the response around emergency, around COVID, I think it gives the provincial government and even the federal government, because we don't have a federal budget yet either. Usually by March, we have a federal budget. And this is the second year in a row we haven't even had a federal budget, which is really quite incredible. But maybe it provides the opportunity to address some of these deeply systemic issues that have just been festering for years, that have been putting more and more people into pain and suffering and poverty. So, I think it is the time to keep the pressure up for sure with the provincial budget and possibly a federal budget that is going to come up, or even a federal election, some people are saying.
I'd like to talk a little bit about law enforcement just for a moment. The risk of overdose has always been there. It certainly has increased in recent years. The approach in law enforcement has failed to keep people safe. My question is, was that even the primary concern of law enforcement to begin with?
No, no.
Can you elaborate on that, Karen, please?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's this lack of understanding right now that it isn't actually, first of all, it's not, the police are still saying here, we're just going to focus on keeping the drugs off the street. And that's not actually possible. And in fact, when they do, bust people, it makes it worse. They contribute, they accelerate the contamination of the supply over, in the last 5-6 years. They always, they actually have created crime by doing this, by taking people's stuff and sending them away to, and them going off to do something else to replace it. It's so absurd. They're actually, but of course that works for that works for law enforcement, because they're perpetuating the drug war, which requires always what should we do? Oh, we should get more cops. It's always more police that all these discussions end with, and that's what they want. So I suppose that the police are trying to, we have the drug war to justify having police in so many ways around the world and down on the ground too. So it's, you know, it's worked out. That's what, and they're nervous about that. Believe, like they're so angry about when you point these things out, they get so angry and they throw a little tantrum about it all the time. And they know that they know their days are numbered. That they're, you know, that they are obsolete. We see it. But it's, so they're fighting back. It's horrible. But they don't. So we don't, like, law enforcement has made it worse. There's a lack of recognition on every level of not only law enforcement, but government generally, that, you know, this isn't heroin. This isn't a product that comes from a plant that is imported. These are synthetic drugs. They can be made anywhere. They're chemicals. They're chemical compounds that don't have a source. They're synthesized, which means they're just made, you know. So we need to have new approaches. You know, we need new approaches, and we need to stop clinging.
We've lost your audio again, Karen. Can you hear us? Can you hear me?
Ourselves, all of us, and stop.
Karen, I'm sorry to interrupt you again.
Yep.
We lost your audio for a moment again. If you could just back.
Okay, sure. Well, I was saying that you know, the police are, all they're doing is perpetuating the drug war. They're perpetuating more police. They really want to make themselves indispensable. So the solution to all problems is more police. But they, you know, and they've accelerated crisis in so many ways. They've produced crime, and made it necessary. So, you know, and in doing so, they are taking, you know, a fifth of the budget, the city budget right now. And then there's even more ways they take more money, bits and pieces all over the place. So this is, but they know that, you know, that we're going to defund the police one way or the other. And because this is the violence we don't need. And they're fighting a war that's a ghost. They're fighting an old war. They're fighting, you know, they can't take the drugs off the street. This is different. Synthesized drugs require a different approach. And we need to stop and just and talk about that. And it doesn't need to involve police. You know, if your conversations about decriminalization involve police, then it's probably not decriminalization very much, is it? You know, they're trying to make themselves indispensable to all this, and they need to not do that. We need to stop relying on them as experts, because cops lie, and we need to defund the police, and we need to decriminalize ourselves, all of us. We need to decriminalize our cities. We need to stop doing this to each other. And I think that, you know, and I think people have trouble sometimes imagining, you know, it's maybe it's difficult to imagine a city beyond policing, without policing. In that sense, you know, it's not, and that's something that you can't just kind of like.
We've lost you yet one more time. I'm going to ask Libby if you could comment on this, please.
Yeah, well, it's a really big issue, and you know the war on drugs has been the most colossal failure in not only North America but globally.
Yeah,
both politically, economically, socially. You know, millions of people have been incarcerated, and of course, the underpinning of the war on drugs is enforcement. Police enforcement of these laws, supposedly that were there to protect people, but have actually caused irreparable harm and death. So, you know, I do think there's an incredible shift that's taking place in our society, not just in Canada, but all over. Of course, we're seeing it in the United States. And it begins to question the very role of law enforcement and police, and what those services are all about, and who is protected and who isn't. We don't often talk about class these days. We talk a lot about identity, and we talk about racism, and all of these questions are very important, but we need to talk about class. And, you know, the role of the police has always been about enforcing a regime around social class, right? If you're poor, you're much more subject to the question of enforcement of laws than you are if you're affluent or you're wealthy. And I always remember the mural that Bruce Erickson painted, you know, that hangs in Bruce Erickson Place at Main and Hastings, where it says, "The law in its majestic equality forbids the rich as well as the poor to sleep under bridges and to beg in the streets and steal bread." And that was from Anatole, France. And here's Jean, she's bringing the mural with that famous saying on it. So, you know, I know some people want to shy away from this debate about funding of the police, but I actually think it's really, really important. I think we have to engage in that debate and the budget line respectfully. I don't think it's about, you know, throwing rocks at each other. I do think it's very fundamental, though, about where we're headed. And as attitudes have changed around drug policy in Canada, then a consequence of that has got to be that we also change our attitudes around policing, particularly when we see that, you know, the violence that has occurred as a result of policing on racialized and vulnerable populations. So these are big questions, and you know, like the city is obviously right there on the front line. But you know, I remember reading reports years ago where you know, there was evidence that something like 80% of crime in Vancouver was driven by the illicit drug trade, right? Yeah. All the B&Es and everything, you know, the petty crime. Well, if you remove that, if you remove prohibition, right, if you create safe supply, if you decriminalize, then, you know, suddenly all of that, what was apparently imperative, is suddenly shifted. Right. So it's a very important discussion to be had. And I mean, I feel badly for the city in some ways, because you guys are, you know, right there feeling those pressures from people who are demanding that they want police, and people who are saying, no, we've got to rethink the budget line of the police. So I really feel for you, like Jean and others who are going through that debate, because it's not easy to be had.
The police have actually appealed the city's decision to not increase their budget. And I wanted to mention in July, we had almost 400 speakers sign up to speak in favor of this motion on decriminalizing poverty and replacing police safety services with community-led services. And one of the women who spoke, Nicole Luongo, said something to the effect that if you're hungry, you can't call the police. But if someone is rummaging in your garbage can, you can call the police. Mm-hmm. So it makes the point that Libby was trying to make, that policing is very class-based. And in some ways, policing is a war on the poor as much as just like a war on drug users. And one of the words that almost everyone who spoke last July used about talking about police was reimagine. And we need to reimagine, you know, how we set things up, what police are used for, what other people can do instead of police. And I'm amassing actually a whole list of places around the world where community-led services are being used instead of police. And I'm funneling them all to our city staff, who are supposed to be consulting with all of these groups who are police, and hopefully we'll come up with something. Then, of course, it'll be another step to actually get what they come up with accepted, because the city doesn't control the police.
Well, I've asked you for an hour of your time, and we are pretty much there, but I am going to ask you all one last question. And it's simply, if you'd like to share any final thoughts on where things need to go in the Downtown Eastside next, what's most important? And maybe we'll start with you, Karen.
Well, I mean, I think things need to change. I mean, first of all, I think that's obvious, and I hope that I mean, and I mean, we really all need to have a talk about, and I mean, it's can't really, you know, in the pandemic, we need to think really, really differently about what we need, like through our relations with each other, from the neighborhood, from each other. How do we want? I mean, people on the ground have no choices about their lives at all. They're stuck in the system or not, and they don't get to choose their futures, so they give up. They see no future, so they have nothing to lose, and then they act like they have nothing to lose, and it's awful. So I think the big thing is about choice. The big thing is about, you know, if you give people choices, chances are they're going to make one or two, you know, and we really need to take apart the top-down kind of hierarchies that we've built. You know, I was saying to somebody last week sometime, I said, you know, it's a small pond, but everybody thinks they're a big fish. And everyone just thrashes around till there's no water left at all. We need to this, and it's tough because when you are crushed down, people do look for someone who's has it a little worse, so they can at least feel better, a little bit better about themselves. And I see that everywhere too. So we've got to just get some of these things out there and try to, you know, see if we could let it go. And some people are really hurting down here too, from what they've been through the last little while. And they need to, I mean, not only do they need a break, they need to have a space to think about what they need for their futures as well. I think we certainly can. We do have the capacity to rethink ourselves, our place in the city, as it were. But we can't do it. We're not doing it yet. I mean, we can't do it the same old way, because, you know, feeling like being down here and having people say, I've heard it, you know, so many times, you know, that's just how it is down here. It's not okay. And that has to stop. It's how it is down here is not okay. So, and we need to consciously try to end the emergency, because people can't live like this, obviously, because they're dying.
Thank you, Karen.
Yeah.
Libby, please.
Well, I'm going to say something pretty simple, and that is, as far as what needs to happen and what needs to change. I think if people in positions of power would set down their preconceived ideas and their, you know, theories of what they think should be or shouldn't be, and actually just listen to people in this neighborhood, in this community, things would begin to set themselves right. Because I've always believed that people in the Downtown Eastside, they know what needs to be done. They know what the solutions are. They know what will improve their lives, what will improve the health and safety and well-being of their whole neighborhood. Like, people know it, you know, yeah. It's not rocket science. And so we have all of these impediments, right, in terms of, you know, studies and stigma and theories and you know, not having elimination of poverty as a priority. So, you know, if those people who are in power at whatever level would just simply listen to the people in this community who know what the heck they're talking about and what's needed, you know, then things would begin to right themselves. I really believe that. And it's that simple, but it's also that complex. Because, of course, if it were just that simple, then why hasn't it been done? Well, it hasn't been done because, you know, when people don't have power, they're not heard. And when people don't have power, they have to fight like hell for everything. And other people, you know, get what they want because they do have power and they do have a voice. So, you know, being heard and having those priorities acted upon would change the situation enormously.
Thank you, Libby. And Jean, any final thoughts?
So yeah, everybody knows that people who use drugs die really early. People who are homeless die early. Governments know that. Governments know that it's cheaper to end homelessness than it is to leave people on the streets. They've funded the studies that say that. So why isn't it happening? The only thing I can think of is it's basically poor bashing, it's stigma, it's prejudice against people who are poor. And I totally agree with Libby, the nothing about us without us, which I think was a Van Du motto. I think we posted it from Van Du, that the way to get around this is to listen to the people who live there. And of course, when you listen to them, they say safe supply, housing, and I think we need a new model of managing housing that isn't so top down, but that's more participatory, and higher social assistance. Those would be huge. And vacancy control would be a way to keep rents down. It wouldn't cost governments much at all. So I think, those are some things. Get rid of the prejudice, and safe supply, listen to the people, housing, welfare, and vacancy control, and keep up the pressure.
Well, thank you very much, all three of you. And I really appreciate your taking this time with me. And I look forward to the possibility of furthering this discussion at a future date.
Nice to meet you, Jason, to see Libby and see Karen's name up here and hear you.
Okay.
You too.
Okay, thanks, guys. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Jason. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You've just heard from Karen Ward, a resident of Vancouver's Downtown Eastside, Jean Swanson, a city councillor in Vancouver, and Libby Davies, former city councillor as well as former MP for the area. We covered a range of topics, including safe drug supply, decriminalization, and defunding the police. Thanks for watching.